This is Joe Tilley. You're listening to Giancarlo on Vibe 105. Don't miss it. Pay attention. Sports coming up.
Vibe Talks. More than just music.
Hey everybody, this is Giancarlo Aulino reporting for Vibe 105 with a Sports VIBEtalks segment where we're going to be talking about the profession of sports broadcasting and a little bit of boxing today. To help me out, I'm happy to be joined by my guest. He's an icon in the sports broadcasting field in Canada. You've seen him on CFTO's sports team and CTV News. He's Joe Tilley. How you doing, Joe?
I'm great, Giancarlo. Good to be here, my man. Thank you.
Yeah, and this whole pandemic has been causing a lot of leagues and even the profession of broadcasting to go in a different direction, a new norm. How have you been able to just cope with it and maintain some sanity during this time?
Well, you know what? It's for me, I connect to a lot of people via Zoom and FaceTime and stuff like that. So I've got friends all over North America, some who I've met through this pandemic. So it's a little bit different. It's a new world. It's a new scenario, and I think we should be getting used to it because I think this is the way of the future. It's going to be, people are learning to communicate via, the internet now, and for obvious reasons. It's because of safety factors and everything else, but it's also becoming quite a convenience. I mean, you can talk to several people in a day without leaving your home. People can do business without leaving their home. People can work without leaving their home, and so it's changing the landscape. The future as we, life as we know it now, it has changed forever. I think, and it's. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I've been able to, connect, like I said, connect with a lot of different people, different places of the world, and I kind of enjoy it. Right, I'm getting used to it, and it's great, But we do miss the personal contact, but in a sense, it's still there. So I've been able to, between doing my sports show and doing other stuff, I've been able to pretty well have a semi-normal life throughout this.
Yeah, it's good to hear. Your career actually, it started off at a really interesting time because TSN wasn't really established as the go-to for sports in Canada, and Sportsnet was still not a long way away for about 15 years maybe before they really got kicked off and went on running there on Rogers. So when you were breaking into sports broadcasting, what did the field look like?
Well, the only sports broadcasting on television was on the networks, right? CTV, CBC, Global, there were independents like City, but there weren't a lot of options. There was no such thing as a 24-hour sports network in Canada. When I got into the business, ESPN was up and running, but at that time they were kind of small potatoes, really. They had things like Australian rules football and that type of stuff. They didn't have any major sports properties. But people started to tune in regularly for their sports capsules or their sports center content. And it was a place where you could get all your sports highlights and pretty comprehensive sports highlights. So that's what started to happen in Canada. And, I think it was 1985, TSN was launched. Back when I first started in Toronto, there was a sports line on Global. And that was a very popular show. And again, it was an hour at night, and they had lots of time to show highlights. And in a sense, they were my competition. But I only had like 8 minutes for sports. They had an hour. So if you're a hardcore sports enthusiast, you're probably turning into sports line. But if you're an average person, you might be turning into mine because, it's like you only have 7 or 8 minutes, and you're sharing the TV with other family members, and not everybody wants to watch an hour of sports at 11 o'clock at night. So, yeah, it's different times, that's for sure. But, the business of sports and sports broadcasting has really evolved and changed since when I first got in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you were then the CFTO news team, the sports section there. You're covering sports, and like what was the day to day like? A typical day to day like for you and your colleagues there?
Well, when I first started at CFTO, I anchored the weekend sports, and then on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I did reporting. So I'd go down to the Maple Leaf Gardens back then and cover the Leafs, or do stories on the Leafs, or I'd go to Exhibition Stadium to do stories on the Jays or Argos, or report on whatever else was in town, that particular day. There were often press conferences with regard to the sports teams. There were also press conferences to do with the starting up of the Molson Indy at that time, and there would always be a news conference pretty much every other day, that I would cover. And then when I wasn't covering those days, I'd be doing stuff with the Leafs, reports on the Leafs and Argos and the Jays. And then on the weekends, I would just anchor both shows and jam it up with as much sports as I could get in there, and it was great. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like the delivery, I think of one line that you do, like sports coming up, like that delivery
Yeah.
you have it's just one line that like people would say, but the way you deliver it, everyone knows. Like when I was watching like the newscast at night, I would see you come on and I know right away, okay, that's when he's going to be talking about sports. I'm going to find out what happened in the Leaf game, the Raptors game. So
Right.
was that something that just came about naturally, or did you think of how can I connect with the viewers like that?
Well, I used to do. Okay, so what happened a number of years ago? We started doing promos. We'd be. I would voice a promo, run a little bit of highlights on the promo, and it would be like Maple Leafs getting ready to face the Bruins. Um, this is a big game. Playoff position could be on the line. Sports coming up, and I would voice that promo, and then we moved into a new set probably around the year 2000, I'd say, and at that particular time, it was an elaborate set. We had these stairs, and they wanted me to use the stairs for my promo, and they wanted me to do my promo live using the stairs. So I started, doing it, walking down the stairs. I'm Joe Tilley, Raptors, and Spurs, uh, going overtime, sports coming up. And it just seemed natural for me to just sort of throw my hand up, coming up. And it was just the first time I did it, walking down those stairs. It just seemed natural to me. So I did it. And then I just kept doing it. And I remember, Lloyd Robertson, remember the CTV news anchor for many years? He was I'd always see him in the studio. Sorry, in the makeup room. I'd be getting my makeup on. He'd be taking his makeup off, coming off his show before I got on my show. And he said to me, he said, "Joe, I love that sports coming up, man. Don't ever stop doing that. That's fantastic." So I thought, well, there's who better to endorse that than Lloyd Robertson. If you remember Lloyd used to do his thing where it was at the end of every show, it would be, "And that's the kind of day it's been for this Tuesday, December 22nd, 2016. For all of us here at CTV News, I'm Lloyd Robertson. Good night." That was his sign off, right? That was his signature. And he's mentioned to me, he said, "That's your signature. Keep it. It's a good signature." So anyway, that became my signature.
Do you think it was going to catch on the way it did with the viewers at the time?
No, I had no idea, right? And there was some pushback too. Some people, "What are you doing that camera thing for?" Because other people, nobody else was doing that. So people are used to a certain look and a certain, sort of attitude, I suppose, and they're not used to that. But me being the type of person I was, and being a little bit, out there, I had no problem doing it, right? I could do it and feel comfortable doing it, and that's the important thing. I mean, if you're doing it and you felt awkward doing it, people would be able to tell you're awkward doing it. But it just came so naturally to me. It was almost like throwing an uppercut, right? And being a former boxer, it was like coming up, and that it just seemed like a natural thing for me, and I couldn't believe how it caught on every time I'd be walking down the street and say, "Hey Joe, coming up," So it was like, so it was a thing that really caught on, and now people just everywhere know me by that, so it's become, as Lloyd said, my signature, right?
And like also the industry, I'm sure you've seen it go through different changes from when you started till now. What do you think is like one of the biggest changes, and what do you maybe wish like something they do now in broadcasting would maybe be from back then, if you can take something from back then?
I don't know if you can, because so back in the day, remember, there's not much in the way of the internet. Internet was just starting,
Yeah.
and there's very little on the internet, and people would not go to the internet for any information, and that's changed. It's like, okay, so people would wait until I was on at 11:30 to find out, to get those Jays highlights or Leafs highlights or Raptors highlights, and and I would always go heavy in the local sports teams, and so there's no way you could watch and if you miss the game, and there's no way you could see what happened, and even if you did see the game, you might have missed certain parts of it. So if you watch my highlight pack, you would be able to get I always try to make my highlight package be like a condensed version of the game. I try to get the elements of the game in that highlight pack, the key turning points and that type of stuff. So that would, and anything that was unusual or funny, we'd put that in there as well. Somebody got hit, knocked over the boards into the other team's players bench, so we'd put that on there, right? Because it's funny. A guy made a catch and went over the wall, came up with the ball. It'd be funny, like, and pretty cool actually. So, you comp, you would put your highlights together, and people would stay up and watch the highlights, and then go to bed. And so that's kind of the way of the world. Now with the internet today, you don't have to wait. I mean, if I got my phone, I get notifications, and if it says Vlad Guerrero Jr. homers in the fourth inning, Jays lead 3-2, I just go to my MLB.com, click the highlight, and watch it. Oh yeah, wow, he really crushed that one. That's a different type of thing today. People don't feel. Why would I wait until the sports at 11 o'clock to watch the highlights when I can see them right now?
Yeah.
And if I miss the Raptors highlights, if I can't see the game, I go to YouTube, key in Raptors, tonight's highlights, 9 minutes, every basket.
Yeah.
And so it's like yeah. So I mean, it's there's no reason to stay up and watch it on the news anymore. So I mean, there's personalities that you like to see, and there's people that you like to hear from, and when it comes to news, maybe it's a little bit different because you get a different slant on the way people are reporting on stuff. But when it comes to sports, it is what it is. So it's pretty easy to report on that, and you can get that stuff anywhere. So the only reason you're watching now is for to look and hear something different, right?
Yeah.
For example, the sports show that I'm starting up next month, which will be on Barn Burner, and we're going to it'll be a Facebook Live. It's called Joe Tilley Sports, and the reason I call it Joe Tilley Sports is so I can say, my first guest is going to be Ron Ellis, a former Leafs great, and we got to sit down for a chat with Ron Ellis, and he talks about Team Canada '72, his time with the Leafs, and on that last Leafs team to win the Stanley Cup. Ron Ellis on Joe Tilley Sports coming up. Right?
That's good.
So anyway, yeah. So that's So I'll be able to sit down with Ron Ellis, and then we've got Wendell Clark. We're also going to have a show with Rick Five. I mean, Tracy Murray, Eureka Rosa da Silva, Scotty Bowman. I've got that's the lineup I've got for the next little while, and so it's an opportunity to sit down with some of these former greats and get to hear some stories and a little bit more about what they were going through at the time and what it was like back in the day to be winning Stanley Cups in Toronto, and and it's it's a unique situation that that's something you're not going to see on YouTube.
Yeah. So
if you're giving somebody something different, right, an opportunity to see somebody, in a different light, to that's something we can we can offer that's different.
Yeah, and that's one heck of a lineup you got there. That's good. So everyone, you heard it here first on Vibe 105.
Yeah.
You definitely want to check out Joe Tilley Sports for that lineup. But you even brought something interesting up there, because the idea of going to YouTube, the idea of finding highlights on even Twitter, for example, like, do you think that's taking away a lot of jobs in, especially for sports broadcasting if they're in the news field?
Well, yes and no, but I mean, so there's an opportunity also to create jobs, right? There's an opportunity for, really, as an individual, you can start your own TV station, right? You can have your own sports station. You can develop your own show station. That's potentially the sky's the limit. It's a different, you're not going to, you're not sending tapes to somebody and saying, hey, have a look at this tape and what do you think, and then getting hired that way. Now you're starting your own thing, and I suppose there still are radio outlets and TV outlets, and might be interested in picking somebody up that's doing that if it makes sense to them. But there's people making, doing podcasts out there, and sports podcasts, and making a lot more money than they did in the regular TV business. So so I mean, there's an opportunity for a guy who believes in himself, willing to hustle a little bit, and applies himself and just works hard and does it. I think there's opportunities. So the old school, the old way, there's those positions are shrinking, those are disappearing. They don't even have sports on CTV anymore. Like, that's at all. So the only sports they do is the news anchor reading a 20-second voiceover, when the Raptors win the NBA championship, and mispronouncing names, and it's like, that's not a sports person's going to listen to that. But your average viewer who's not a sports fan will say, oh, that's neat. Oh, okay, cool. Oh, the Raptors won the championship. Oh, cool. A sports fan was watching the game and then watching the highlights afterwards on this channel that had the broadcast, or watching everything on YouTube, and then watching all the post game reaction, and all that other stuff. So so people who are hardcore sports fans are going to go right to the source, and people who aren't sports fans at all, just a little 20-second voiceover is all they need. They're happy with that, so they don't care. So that's why it has changed the way it is. Plus, it's a financial thing. The revenue for television isn't what it used to be, because let's face it, like who like your age, Giancarlo, or younger, or even a little older than you, who's watching the news?
Yeah.
Like, right? Are you not watching stuff on YouTube and the internet and
Twitter?
If you want to see something, if something, oh wow, did you see that hit by Austin Matthews on Chara? That was unbelievable. You go, oh yeah? You go right to the internet and you watch it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true.
You don't wait for the news.
Yeah.
Right? So
that's it's an interesting thing you brought up there too, because about like social media is something new from this like whole industry. It's going in towards that direction. So someone like you who's been there from, I guess, the start of this whole sports programming in Canada, how has it affected you in a sense?
Yeah, I was there the very first radio. I was there on the very first radio broadcast in 1922. Yeah, no. How has it affected me? Well, I mean, so back in the day, okay, when I first started there, I worked for CFTO Toronto, and then I would do all kinds of stuff for CTV, the network. Hosting the weekly NBA game on Saturdays, and hosting auto racing, doing boxing play by play, and all kinds of stuff like that. And then we started we well I had a show that started on CFTO called Sports Beat Today, which I started back in 1989. And I used to co-host it with Jerry Dobson. It would run Sunday night at 6:30. They'd have a half-hour newscast from 6 to 6:30, and then we do Sports Beat Today from 6:30 to 7 on Sundays. And it was a very successful show. But then we started Rogers. It was CTV Sports then.
Oh, yeah.
In 93, 94, 95, 95, and maybe somewhere, maybe 95, 96. We started CTV Sportsnet. So we stopped doing that show. But actually, I stopped doing the show, and Sunil stepped in about 93 or whatever, because I just was tired of working 6 days a week. And then so Sunil started doing the show with Jerry. But then Rogers Sportsnet started. And once we started Rogers Sportsnet, well, then I started to do shows on Rogers Sportsnet, fill and anchoring and all that stuff besides my regular gig. And then we bought TSN and sold Sportsnet to Rogers, and then occasionally doing stuff for TSN. But then after a while, that sort of just fizzled out. I was just doing my regular gig, and then when CTV 3 years ago decided they didn't need sports anymore, so they dropped sports entirely. So that was the end of that. That was the end of a fun run, 33 and a half years. So that's how it affected me. And then since that time, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to do a sports show. So I started doing it with him. We did that for about a year and a half. And now I'm doing my own thing starting next month. So, yeah, I guess I didn't want to quit entirely. I was prepared to just say, forget about it, just retire. But, once I started doing it again, I guess I got the bug, and now it's so something new.
Yeah, we're happy you did. We want to hear you. We want to hear your stories, and just hearing what you're up to. I think it's good that you're still doing it. Once again, for those just joining us here on Vibe 105, this is Giancarlo Aulino with a Sports VIBEtalks segment, being joined by Joe Tilley. Joe, I want to ask you there, because you brought up there 33 and a half years being in involved with it and broadcasting. I'm sure you've had a lot of experiences in the industry. If you can share, I guess, an experience with us, something for radio, what would be an experience that was memorable for you, maybe with a player or involved in the field over there?
Oh, okay. So the one that sticks out right now for me is so 1984. I wasn't at CFTO. I started at CFTO in July of 1984. But in the spring of 1984, I was working at CFCN Lethbridge, and I was a sports director. And I was born and raised in Edmonton, so we were in Edmonton for the weekend, and it was a Saturday night, and the Oilers were playing the Islanders, Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. So this is 84. And this is either late May, early June, 84. And the Oilers are playing the Islanders, Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. And I called the Oilers PR office and talked to Bill Tuelli, the PR guy. Told him I was in town, and asked him if I could get a press pass for the game. And he said, okay, no problem. So I got the press pass, went down and watched the game, and the Oilers won the Stanley Cup. And they were my team. That night they won the Stanley Cup, and it was such an incredible night. And so I look at my press pass, it says all access.
Wow.
So after the game, I go into the Oilers dressing room, and me and a couple of the reporters, we were pouring like cans of beer into the Stanley Cup and drinking out of it. Randy Gregg, the Oilers defenseman, who was also a doctor, he pours it out and he pours champagne in here, guys, drink this. And so we got drank some champagne out of the Stanley Cup. And it was quite an amazing night. It was just looking around and taking it all in and watching different players who are, experiencing all this stuff for the first time and how they were reacting to it and just breathing it all in. It was such an exciting time. That was a fun night, and everything about it, the game, the dressing room after. And I was one of the very last people to leave the dressing room. When I left the dressing room, Ken Linsman was there, sitting up and kind of beside his locker, up in a thing up top, and there might have been a couple other guys, maybe an equipment guy, and that was about it when I walked out there, because I just didn't want to leave, and that was such a fun experience, and I got a chance to cover a lot of sports. Like I was an amateur boxer. I got a chance to cover some boxing events, big boxing events. I was when Lennox Lewis had his first title defense. I was in Vegas for that against Tony Tucker. When Donnie Lalonde fought Sugar Ray Leonard for the light heavyweight championship, or was it super middleweight or light heavyweight? I mean, I can't remember what the title was. I think it was light heavy. I think Ray moved up to light heavy to challenge Lalonde for the title. I was there for that, ringside for that. That was a really cool thing. Yeah, I was there, in the press box in 2017. Was it the bat flip? Was that 2016?
It might have been, 2016, I think.
2016, yeah, for the bat flip and the whole thing with the Texas Rangers, and that was so wild. That was an emotional roller coaster, to be, to take that in, because at times it looked like the Jays were done.
Yeah.
There was that run that was allowed, that it looked like interference, or I can't remember what it was. It was something with Russell Martin when he threw the ball was interfered with somehow. And anyway, they allowed the run to score, and that gave Texas the lead. And then the Jays came back, and then when there was the fighting between the two teams, it was just such an emotional roller coaster. And then when Joey hit that home run and did the bat flip, and it was just like, wow. It was a great moment. And so, so I've got a chance to experience a lot of that stuff firsthand, and pretty cool.
Yeah, that bat flip too. I remember watching that on TV. So just seeing that, I can only imagine what it was like there. That's amazing.
Well, I'm telling you, when the Rangers scored that go-ahead run, there was so much frustration, and you could feel the tension and the anger. Like, these two teams did not like each other, and it was almost like the Rangers were, there was so much emotion, and when people criticized about Batista for flipping that bat, but just, it just made sense at the time. It really did. I'm telling you, because it was kind of there you go. We've done this, and it was perfect. It was really perfect. And, and it was just, you're not supposed to cheer in the press box, right?
Yeah.
Tell you.
That's what they tell.
But pretty much everybody's cheering the press box that night, except for the Rangers media.
That's awesome. Yeah. Great memory there. And I just want to transition too, because you mentioned there that you're a boxer, and big boxing event's going to happen that I didn't even think would even happen. Mike Tyson stepping back into the ring in his 50s against Roy Jones Jr. What were your thoughts when this was first announced, and are you excited for this?
Well, okay, so before it was announced, I remember seeing training vids of Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, wow, he looks good. How old is Tyson? 53, 54? Wow, he looks good. I mean, he looks as good as he's ever looked in terms of the way he's throwing punches and hitting those bags. And, he looked pretty awesome. And then when I found out he was fighting again, he wanted to fight again. And then at that time he pitched to Holyfield, and Holyfield would only fight an exhibition. And Tyson was not fighting an exhibition. He wants to fight for real. And if you don't want to fight for real, forget about it. So Roy Jones Jr. came out of the woodwork and said, yeah, I'll fight you for real. And think about Roy, he's 50, or I think he's 50 or 51. Tyson's 53, 54 and around there. And Jones Jr., I think, has fought as recently as like 2 or 3 years ago.
Wow.
So Tyson has not fought, I think, since 2003, which is a long time, maybe a little bit later than that, but not much. And then Jones Jr. hasn't fought for 2 or 3 years, so he has an advantage in that aspect. But Tyson is such a powerful fighter and naturally a heavyweight. Roy Jones Jr., remember, he fought at the Olympics as a light middleweight.
Yeah.
So 154 pounds. So, that's a big difference between being a natural heavyweight and being a natural. I think he fought his best. His best fights came, to me, in my opinion, as him as a middleweight to maybe a middle, super middle, maybe light heavyweight. As a heavyweight, sure, he won the title and everything else, but he wasn't the same to me as an effective fighter. Great hand speed, incredible hand speed, probably still has great hand speed. Doesn't have the kind of Tyson's power. And Tyson's a good defensive fighter too. So, I mean, it's like I can't see Roy Jones beating him, but I am really looking forward to seeing the fight for sure.
And do you think we'll see more of this? Because in MMA, like as a comparable, I've seen Bellator MMA, which is like the competitor to the UFC. They had Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie, and both of them were close to 50. Shamrock was in his 50s, Gracie maybe 49, but in and around there. Do you think this Legends deal with boxers would sell more, especially now?
Well, because the names, right? It depends. Like certain parts of the planet where they don't follow boxing as closely as they do, see in Europe, or in pockets in Canada. So yeah, the Legends stuff has its its value, I suppose, but there are some good fighters out there right now. Like Terrence Crawford, the welterweight who just fought last weekend. Him and Errol Spence, a couple undefeated guys that a lot of people want to see fighting. Two Canadians that are coming up in the welterweight division. Castillo Clayton, who's undefeated and fought for the world title a couple of weeks ago, got jawed by a draw. They called it a draw when he won that fight. And then another guy is fighting in January is Cody Crowley, the crippler from Peterborough. He's undefeated and 19-0, and so there's some excitement for me and a lot of boxing fans in the welterweight division. The heavyweights, that's compelling now too, with Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. Have those first two fights between those two. That was pretty cool. And then a lot of people want to see Tyson Fury fight Anthony Joshua. We might see another Fury Wilder fight. There's a couple other heavyweights that are coming up, that are making some noise, and there's there is some interest there. So I think the Legends are great, but I mean, I don't know if I want to see George Foreman fight again at 65 or 70 or whatever he is now. But Tyson, sure, with the kind of condition he's in, yeah, why not? I mean, he's still got that crazy power, and if Holyfield was willing to take a fight that's not an exhibition, it might be interesting. I might. Well, yeah, I certainly watch that. I definitely would watch that. Lennox Lewis, if you decided to come back and fight Tyson, I'd watch that. So so there are certain legend fights that would certainly pique my interest. But to me, there's a lot of pretty good fighters out there right now to keep your eye on, and I think boxing is making somewhat of a comeback now. It's a great sport for COVID, because you need 3 judges, all equally distant, spread apart. You need cameras. You need a referee. You need 2 fighters, a couple cornermen. Boom, you're good to go. It's not like a football team in the NFL where you need 100 people.
Yeah.
On each side of the field. It fits the pandemic climate quite nicely. So, yeah.
And also, with the cornerman, it kind of adds, like, it is kind of fans, because you have the one corner cheering for their fighter, the other corner cheering for them. So for a viewership, I agree with you. It is, like, especially under this climate, it does give you that same kind of feel of you being in an arena with fans around. And especially now with Mike Tyson. Like, he's a guy who he doesn't like making it by the hour. He doesn't like going the distance in fights. He wants it to go in and out.
No.
So should people who are viewing this, who are going to pay to watch it, have that in mind? Like, this could be over quick.
If I'm going to make $10 million for a fight, I make $10 million whether that fight lasts 1 minute or 48 minutes, right? So it doesn't matter. You know? Yeah, so it doesn't matter. So.
And Tyson too, like, I'm sure you saw his prime. Like, what was that like at the time? Like, just experiencing this guy come up 19 years old and just knock out everybody.
Yeah, it was exciting. Tyson was always excitement. I was there actually in Vegas too for his comeback fight against Hurricane Peter McNeely.
Wow.
I was like nose to nose with Mike at one time because I tried to get an interview with him. He didn't want to talk to me, but I corralled him. So that we had a cameraman was on this. My cameraman was on that left side of me, and I had the microphone over here. We had the microphone cord, and him and his entourage were walking by. I said, "Mike, give me a minute for an interview, buddy." And he wouldn't stop, but he came up to the door and he couldn't go anywhere because we had the microphone cord corralling him and his entourage. So I said, "So can you talk now, Mike?" He says, "No, I got nothing to say," and he just walked away. But he kind of gave me a wink and a nod. It was a kind of a funny bit. He just wasn't talking pre-fight, except for the news conferences we had. But I just still wanted to try to get him, one-on-one.
That'd be cool to see, especially now Mike Tyson kind of changed his life around, and now his own podcast. He's another guy who's been successful, like you mentioned before about going into podcasting. Mike Tyson, his podcast alone is one of the most successful ones. But on that note, Joe, how can our listeners follow you on social media and follow your show?
Well, my on Twitter and Instagram, it's at Joe Swiss Tilley, at Joe Swiss Tilley, Tilley, Swiss SWISS, and on Facebook, Joe Tilley, and the show is going to be live on Facebook and Barn Burner and other platforms. It'll be called Joe Tilley Sports. Coming up.
That's great. Definitely recommend that follow. Joe, I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on here to talk all things broadcasting and boxing, and we wish you all the best.
Thanks, Giancarlo. Thank you. My pleasure.
That was Joe Tilley. Now we're going to send it back to the studio for more programming right here on Vibe 105.
And now back to your Vibe 105.